Good morning, Broncos fans. You are watching Legends of Mile High, and I'm your host, Thomas Hall, where we bring you current events mixed with history in hopes that we give Broncos fans a well rounded view of this great franchise. So, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining. This morning, we are going to talk about fixing the offensive line in one offseason, which will be interesting because some people don't think it can be done, but I think it can. So let's get started. But first, let's jump into a few of the chats, see who's here today. Dave Glassman is coming in saying happy Friday, Broncos country, and coming in with a blue and orange heart. So thank you, Dave, for being here. Really appreciate seeing you here. Jeremy Sean is also coming in saying, morning, Thomas. If Payton fixes the O-line, then he fixes the run game and he fixes Russ. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Jeremy, for being here. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how much fixing the O-line will fix other things. Obviously, the run game, and of course, Russ needs that help. He's he is definitely in need of a little bit more time to throw the ball, as we saw. Some quarterbacks can get the ball out quickly, and they actually help the O line. And I think the inverse is correct when you're talking about Russell Wilson. Not that that makes him a bad quarterback or anything of that nature, but taking a little bit longer time to throw, you need a little bit longer time to block, or you need to get him, get him moving and get him a little bit more time in those in that. So fixing the O line is a big task because we all saw what happened last season with the O line. Michael Ronquillo coming in from Facebook Stars. Thank you so much, Michael. It's great seeing you here in the mornings. I really appreciate the support. I really appreciate you being here. And Michael says, good morning, Thomas Hall on Legends of Mile High. Go Broncos with an orange and blue heart. Yes, go Broncos. It has been a while since we have been optimistic about the Broncos, unfortunately. Although I actually am optimistic far too often. So I've seemed to get disappointed every season, the last 6 seasons. But I've also been watching for a long time and seeing the Broncos in their winning ways. So it's hard for me to think that they're going to lose, which has happened quite often the last 6 years. So go Broncos is right. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. So fixing the offensive line. Let's talk about that. I actually sent a tweet to Mark Schlereth yesterday asking him his top 3 things that would fix the offensive line in one off season. And he was gracious enough to tweet me back. And he said that the top 3 things for him would be better players, obviously, an identity, and a offensive line coach that would tie those 2 things together. And it kind of makes sense, right? Right now, the Broncos have an offensive line coach. They brought in Zach Strief. So hopefully he is good enough to make the offensive line better with his coaching. As we saw, Butch Berry had some struggles last season trying to make the offensive line a cohesive unit. And I do have to give him a little bit of slack because the offensive line suffered significant injuries. An identity is something that they're going to have to come up with their own. I don't know what that'll be. Hopefully, it's one of those offensive lines that are a mauling type offensive line that is able to be aggressive and push the pile and inflict some punishment on the defensive line. That would be great, but I don't know what the identity is going to be. But getting different players, getting better players is something that they can do in the offseason. And there's probably going to be 3 changes along the offensive line. I don't know if Garrett Bowles will get traded or not. It seems like that's not going to be the case. So I think Garrett Bowles will return. I don't know why the Broncos would be willing to get rid of Garrett Bowles when that would create another pretty massive hole on an offensive line that's already got several to begin with. I think Quinn Miners is still sticking around as right guard. So that's a plus. I think he's one of the up and coming offensive linemen in the NFL with better coaching. He's got a great mentality. He's never quits. And you see him running down the field, following Javonte Williams and still inflicting punishment. So that type of mentality is great. But the Broncos have been searching for right tackle since Orlando Franklin left. And They also thought they got a good one in Lloyd Cushenberry at center, but he turned out to not be so good, unfortunately. He struggled last year mightily. And then finally, the left guard position is probably going to be an open position because Reisner might not be returning. Now, I like Reisner. I think he has an incredible old car collection as well. But it will be a shame to miss that on Twitter when you're following Dalton Reisner if you're an old car enthusiast. But he's probably gone, and that's unfortunate. He's a great community guy and everything, but he did struggle last season with his blocking. It seemed. Dom, thank you for coming in, saying good morning, Scott, Thomas, Scott, and Broncos country, Denver Broncos for life. Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you, Scott, for being here in the background, helping out. It's great to not have to do this by yourself, especially when you have technical difficulties once in a while. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much. Lawrence Rivera, my man, coming in with Facebook stars. Thanks for showing the support. Bro, the twirls on that stash are going going strong. But honestly, this line was a Pro Bowl line under Mike Munchak. Thank you for the set. I appreciate all the comments about this mustache because when I first shaved my beard and went with the mustache, I was like, I don't think this is going to last very long. But since people like it, it's starting to grow on me, I guess. And I'm starting to like it too. So thank you, Lawrence, for the support. And thank you for the comment about the mustache. Yeah, that's true. I think that was one big thing that hurt the offensive line this season was losing Mike Munchak and going with Birch Berry. There were some rumblings about his coaching style, even back in training camp when I was there, that kind of gave me a little bit of pause thinking about how well the offensive line was going to work under him. And the bigger issue too is the fact that there was so many injuries along that offensive line. It was very hard to get cohesiveness. And when you're going to your second, third string offensive lineman, you're going to have a drop off. That's just the way it is. So there were some definite issues that affected the offensive line, not just the actual players. But since we have three holes to look at here on this show, three holes: right guard, or left guard, center, and offensive tackle, right tackle is to be specifically. We are going to talk about how you can fix that in the offseason. Now, the Broncos don't have that many draft picks. So that is something that we have to consider when we're thinking about it, because you can't go out and spend a lot on the offensive line in the draft when you have other holes that you would rather fill. But I would like to see them grab at least one offensive lineman for the future in the draft. Now, they're going to be later round picks now because the Broncos have traded away their draft picks. They had to get Russell Wilson, and then they had to go out and get Sean Payton, and that cost draft picks. So these are later round, more development draft picks. But as we've seen in the past, I mean, there's so many draft choices the Broncos have made that turned out to be incredible. Tom Nalen obviously was probably the greatest offensive lineman that was picked late in the draft by the Broncos of all time. But there's been others, Matt Paradis, plenty of and undrafted free agents too. Like I remember Matt Lepsis was one of those. So being able to get those guys to develop them will be a huge plus for the Broncos, but it's going to be hard for them to step in this year. So to fix the right tackle, there's a couple options. Now you can go out and check out my offensive line free agent analysis, where I looked at age of all the offensive linemen since 1998 who played until at least 2008. And you can see that their offensive linemen are able to maintain a pretty solid playing time throughout their career, and then they drop off a little bit later than, say, running backs or other skill players, except quarterback, of course. And then at 34 years of old, they have another peak for some reason. They peak again, they stay healthy, whatever it is. I'm not really sure exactly what happens, but you can take a chance on an older player because they oftentimes have that kind of one bounce back season, get, a Pro Bowl, or they play good enough to get a Pro Bowl or something of that nature. And that's when you're taking a chance on a player, offensive line at 34 for some reason is a great time to take a chance versus other positions. So you got to keep that in mind, because you can't go out and spend on big on three free agents because you're just not going to have the money, right? The Broncos are just not going to have the money in order to do that. So you got to kind of piece it together with maybe one or two pretty solid offensive linemen that you have to pay that are young, up and coming, and then grab one of those older guys. And so there's a couple ways to go about it. So right tackle is one that has to be fixed, and I think that you could take a shot at someone like Jawan Taylor. He's coming into free agency. He's very young. He is going to be hitting his peak. You could take a risk of putting some money out there for him for a long term and solidify that right tackle. And I think he's a pretty solid right tackle. And I think he's going to keep getting better, especially with better coaching. He's going to become a pretty solid right tackle, probably one of the better ones that the Broncos have had. So I think going after someone like that is a great plan. So you spend the big money there, and then you look at you start to think about, okay, well, we need to spend a little less on the left guard position and a little less on the center. So get that one up and coming star, and then you go out and get someone like maybe Nate Davis, who's probably not going to cost you a ton in that left guard position. So you have that. So that solidifies that. And then if you want to even, dip down into that 1 year, let's grab some older guy that can come in and play for one season and hopefully have that resurgence. You can get that center in Rodney Hudson. And I think that those three combinations can get you a solid nucleus to kind of build around and have somebody there to help bridge that gap until your drafted players are able to step in. Quentin Caldwell, thank you for coming in with the super chat. Thank you very much. Appreciate the support. And Quentin says, good morning, everyone. The O-line can't get fixed in one season, but it can be upgraded. Well, that's a good point, because a lot of people don't think so, but I think they can. So with a lot of different combinations, obviously. So that's what we're talking about. I think they can fix it for a season. I should say that. I should stipulate that they could fix it well enough for next season and set it up better for being a good offensive line continuing in the future. Now, you have to take some risks, obviously. Like I'm talking about Rodney Hudson. That's a big risk, but he's coming into that time where the analysis shows that he could have a bounce back season if he can stay healthy. So that's a big risk. And I agree with you. You may not be able to fix it long term in one season, but you can fix it to be good enough to have a solid offensive line that is much better than 2022, but in 2023. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. It's a very good comment, because it is tough to think about how are you going to get three offensive linemen to come in and really change the face of this offensive line. And if Bowles is gone, then that makes it even harder. But I think Bowles is sticking around. I don't know. It seems crazy for Sean Payton to come in and then they start trading a bunch of players away, solid players, to kind of, hamstring him from the beginning. So I don't think that's in the cards. And of course, Quinn Miners is sticking around. So as I'm starting to go through this, the right tackle position is kind of the key. So if you can't get Jawan Taylor or someone, some young up and comer like that is going to be a solid free agent signing that'll cost money, then you got to kind of change it around, right? So, or if you can't get that Nate Davis at the guard, you got to kind of flop those other two positions. So say you get Taylor, but you can't get someone like Nate Davis. So you go after the older guy like Saffold, right? Roger Saffold. He's kind of in that time period where he might have a bounce back season, that one season where he does really good. And kind of solidifies that left guard position for one season. And then you can look at a center like Evan Brown, right? He played guard last year, but he's obviously a center. He had a pretty solid season, and I think in Detroit, and I think that you could get him for not too much money. It would probably be a decent amount of money, but then you've got all three of those positions solidified again with only one big risk, and that's in Saffold. So Quinn Caldwell's coming back in, and he's saying, what about Brandon Shell at right tackle? That's a name that I didn't think of when I was doing the analysis. I pulled a few names out based on their age, but let me just take a quick look here at Brandon Shell, and I'll tell you, I can't think of what. Okay, Brandon Shell. All right, yeah. For some reason, I was drawing a blank on him. Offensive tackle, big guy that played for the Jets and played for Seattle and Miami, kind of bounced around. He's in that time period at age where I don't know if I would take a big risk on him. He's going to be probably 31, I think, next season, or pretty close to it. He's already hit that peak and is kind of on his downward trend for tackles or offensive linemen. So I don't know. That's an intriguing question. As far as when I looked at the analysis, that's kind of the time when you don't take a chance on someone who's starting to decline in age, so to speak. Because I mean, there are times in we see like that people defy um, age, like Tom Brady, but most players don't defy age, right? So he's starting to decline. If it's a 1 year kind of take it 1 year light contract, that might be okay. I mean, he could be a good depth player. I just wouldn't want to take a risk on him being the starting right tackle. Broncos have taken too many risks on starting right tackles that have not panned out, so they've got to be very careful. But yeah, he's not a great pass blocker according to PFF, but he's going to be cheap. So maybe a rotational player might be in order for him, but I don't know enough about his play to really say yes, that's a great idea. So thank you for that comment. Lawrence Rivera coming in, thank you, from Facebook. Much love, guys. I'm running around trying to get offensive tackles today, but you guys kick butt, rock on. Trying to get OT today. Sorry, I'm in football mode. OT. Well, thank you, Lawrence. I appreciate you being here this morning for what you can. So, yeah, thank you for that. So now let's look at the other side of the coin. Say that Jawan Taylor can't be had, right? So the Broncos just they can't afford him, or he decides to sign somewhere else. Then you got to look for maybe a cheaper, older tackle for that 1 year to kind of solidify that right tackle, and then you spend the money on the other two positions. And a name that jumps out to me is Riley Creef, right? He's been a solid tackle his whole career. He's hitting that age where, you might have a bounce back season and be pretty solid. Might be able to take a risk on him on a 1 year deal. And then you look at the other positions to spend a little bit more money on. That's when you go after for the guard like Ben Powers, right? You put the money into the guard instead of that right tackle, and then you then bring in someone at center like I said, Evan Brown. So now you have those three positions sort of solidified again. I know that Reef's a big risk, but like I said, when you look at the analytics, that's a time where they start to bounce back. And then, so now you have you have three different scenarios where you could actually make even more combinations with that, right? But you actually have solidified your offensive line going into next year. And as you enter the draft, you can start to figure out, based on what you've spent in that free agency and how long of a deal you have, when you start drafting those players to step in. So if you're, that last scenario, you need to go in and try and find a right tackle for the future right away. So you better be spending some quality draft choices on that right tackle to develop and become a starter for the team after 2023. And hopefully you hit. And the draft is obviously, especially in the later rounds, tends to be a very miss instead of hit proposition. But you have to go in and at least try to do that, because you don't want to set yourself up for that 1 year and then you're back to the right tackle being poor again, or trying to fill it in with another 1 year. So hopefully the Broncos can take this approach, and I think they can. I think that you can actually get a pretty solid offensive line. So if you get those better players, like Shreth was saying, you get those better players, surround them with have a nice, a good coach and you create an identity. Now you've got something that is going to be way better than what we saw in 2022. And if you have that other scenario, the first scenario where you have like Rodney Hudson at the center, you better go out and get yourself a center in the draft. You better find somebody who can develop in a year and start to be very good. And I think centers can. I think you can find centers later in the draft that come around, and we've seen it with the Broncos plenty of times. So I think you can do it. I think you can fix the offensive line. Now the big question mark for me is how good is Streif going to be in the coaching area? He's been an offensive lineman for a long time, and he's coached for a short amount of time. Sean Payton seems to trust him. He was an assistant offensive line. So it'll be interesting to see how well he makes this offensive line better in one season, and how well, if coaching Garrett Bowles, how well he does there, because we saw Garrett Bowles responds to the right coaching, not necessarily better coaching, but to the right coaching. And Munchak got the best out of him, really, that any other offensive line coach had. And there's been some, he's talked about how he has a difficult time learning, and having the right approach to him is going to make him a better player that we saw a couple of years ago. So if he can bounce back, obviously, from his injury and get back to form, how's that coaching going to get him to be better? And if you get some vets in there, get one really savvy vet who knows how to make all the calls, who knows how to help set up the line and get everybody, they're going to play off each other much better. This last offseason, we saw it was a mess because there was nobody there that really did that, because there's so many injuries. Everybody on that line was injured at some point. I think I think everybody on the offensive line missed games. So it'll definitely be interesting to see if they can do this. And I think this approach works. I think, obviously it's my approach and how I'm going about seeing it. But if you look at the analysis of those offensive linemen over the years, you can go ahead and do this. And I think you can get a good offensive line put together. So that's how I think you can fix the offensive line. Now, if there are any questions about that, please throw them in the chat. And I'm going to jump into something else, a little bit of history now, after talking about the offensive line. And I'm going to talk about some Super Bowls, right? Some seasons that the Broncos should have won the Super Bowl, right? And there's been several times that I think that the Broncos should have won the Super Bowl. Just a little bit of history to end the show today, as we're nearing the end. And I'm going to talk about actually six seasons, right? So everybody talks about the 2012 season. That should have been a Super Bowl for the Broncos. You had Peyton Manning. They just won 11 games in a row. They were 13-3 going into the playoffs, and they had the number 2 offense and the number 4 defense in the NFL. That's a pretty good combination. And then they went in, had home field advantage, and they got beat, unfortunately, in the playoffs, the first round. They were terrible. The only player that wasn't terrible that game was Trenton Holiday. And Peyton Manning was bad. Champ Bailey, everybody was pretty poor in that game. And I think that team would have went into the Super Bowl and won that Super Bowl had they not been bumped by Baltimore Ravens. And people still talk about that, Raheem Moore, but it was everybody on that day were terrible. So I think that they could have. I think that they would have won the Super Bowl had they actually won that first playoff game. And then in 2025 is another one that I think was a team that would have won the Super Bowl, not because they were a good team for sure, but the opponent in that Super Bowl was the Seattle Seahawks, and I think the Broncos would have matched up really well with them. And Plummer was having his best season, and then went into the AFC Championship game and had his worst game of the season. 4 turnovers after having very few in it, that season compared to his career. And that cost them. And I think the other thing that cost them was that the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive game plan was perfect against Larry Coyer's blitz heavy package. And so they ended up losing that game. And I think they would have went in and beat the Seahawks just like the Steelers did. So that's another one that the Broncos had the team to win the Super Bowl, to win it all, and missed out. And it's a bummer. And then in 1996 is another one that I remember watching. That game was just, horrible to watch. The Jaguars beat the Broncos. They shouldn't have done it. Another team that was great, 13-3. They had home field advantage, and I think they were a far superior team to the AFC representative that year, the New England Patriots. I think they would have went in and actually gave the Green Bay Packers everything they could handle that year. And I think that would have been the first year that, John Elway going into the Super Bowl is not going to let that team lose. And unfortunately, they lost to the Jaguars after sitting their players going into the playoffs far too long. They were rusty. The defense just played terrible, and the Broncos lost first round of the playoffs. That was a team that should have gone to the Super Bowl, and I think they would have beat the Green Bay Packers that season. And of course, they beat them the next season, which was very sweet. But I think the Green Bay Packers weren't even as good a team, weren't as good a team in '96 as they were in '97. So I think they would have won that Super Bowl that year. So what if, what could have been, unfortunately. Then I think 1991 is, nobody talks about that team. The 1991 Broncos. This was when the Buffalo Bills were going, to back-to-back Super Bowls in those era. And the Broncos were a heck of a team that year. They had an incredible defense that season, great at getting to the quarterback. And they went into the AFC Championship game and lost 10-7. And their kicker, David Treadwell, missed 3 field goals. So they could have easily won that game had the kicker made 2 field goals, but he missed 3. And it was a tough showing, defensive struggle. And I think the Washington Redskins that year were an incredible team. So it would have been a tough game to win. But when I look at that team, it would have been a rematch to the 87 debacle, that second quarter explosion where the Washington Redskins just blew that game out of the water. But this is a rematch against the team that they did that to. I think they would have had a different attitude. I think they would have had a better team going in. And I'll tell you why after I say good morning to Chris Hernandez coming in from Facebook Stars. Man, I really appreciate that. I appreciate the support. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming in, and jump into the comments if you have anything to talk about these old Super Bowl what ifs that we're talking about this morning before we end the show. So yeah, that 1991 team had a much better defense. They wouldn't have, that 87 team that went in had lost their best defensive back to a broken arm in the playoffs. And Dennis Smith was just returning after almost a season-long injury that he came back into the playoffs, and it was pretty rusty. But this time they had a much better secondary. They had Atwater, they had Dennis Smith, who had played all season, and they had Tyrone Braxton, who's one of the most underrated Broncos of all time, in my opinion. They had that was a solid defense. They would have went into that game against the Redskins and would have gave them everything that they could handle. I think that was one of the biggest missed opportunities, being that they were in the AFC Championship game and they only lost because the kicker missed so many field goals. But that's another one. 1991 season. Check it out. Great season that nobody talks about. And then in 1986, I know they went to the Super Bowl, and I know they lost. They got spanked. But if you go back and watch that Super Bowl, the Broncos were having their way moving the ball against the Giants in the first half. I mean, they were going up and down the field quite easily. They were only stopped a couple of times. And the problem was they got down one of their possessions. They were first and goal on the 1 yard line, and just the play calling was terrible and couldn't punch it in. And then they missed the field goal. And then another play that really cost them was the Clarence K that everybody talks about, the instant replay debacle, where he caught the ball, but the refs said it was incomplete. Would have set the Broncos up on the 41 yard line, and they were moving the ball. That would have been another scoring opportunity. And then finally, to end the second half, John Elway tried to force the ball into Orson Mobley, and it was he missed the ball, but Steve Watson was wide open, all by himself in the end zone, easy touchdown to end the second half, and he didn't see him. And then, of course, they missed that field goal. So they went in, the Clarence K missed play ended up being a safety. So they went into halftime, basically the score was 0-0 again. It was 10-9 going into the half. And the Broncos should have been up 27-7 at least, maybe 24-7 at worst, but they messed it up. But they were moving the ball like crazy, and that would have changed the entire second half. The New York Giants would have been playing from behind, trying to catch up, and the Broncos could have just pinned their ears back and pass rushed on just about every play and got to Sims much, much better. I keep looking at that game thinking that should have been a Super Bowl. That should have been John Elway's first Super Bowl. But unfortunately, they got blown out in the second half badly. And I think that was very costly, that first half, all those miscues when they were moving the ball like crazy. And then finally, the last one I'm going to talk about is 1977. That team should have won the Super Bowl. Orange Crush defense, one of the greatest defenses of all time. And the reason why they lost that Super Bowl, the offense coughed the ball up 8 times, and they only they led to only 17 points. 8 turnovers for the Broncos offense and led to 17 points. And frankly, it should have been a blowout. But 8 turnovers by the offense with the defense that they hamstrung. They set the Cowboys up so often on easy scoring opportunities by those interceptions and fumbles. I mean, it's incredible. 8 turnovers. And frankly, that last touchdown that put the score up out of reach to make it 27, that long catch in the end zone wasn't really a catch if you look at it. Guy dropped the ball, and that was it. You know, he didn't keep the control through the motion of the catch, and it should not have been called. But you know, that's another one that you look at back at the game, and you're just like, wow, what the heck happened? 8 turnovers, and you just hamstrung the defense. One of the greatest defenses of all time, but it doesn't matter. You can't come back from that. So those are the 6 seasons that the Broncos actually should have won the Super Bowl. But unfortunately, events transpired that they didn't. But go ahead and, all those Super Bowls, I believe, are on YouTube. Go back and check them out, and you'll see what I saw, or those games at least that I'm talking about here, and how the Broncos could have had so many more Super Bowls trophies in their case had they just had a little bit more fortune, or played a little bit differently. Just a few differences. I mean, I think that it's fun to think about what ifs, and sometimes it makes you angry. But those are some of the greatest non Super Bowl winning seasons in Broncos history, where a team that was good enough to win it all. So thank you very much for everybody jumping in here. Michael Ronquillo's jumping with Facebook, saying great history of Broncos Super Bowl games we could have won. Yeah, thank you for that, Michael. I think about these kind of things all the time because I go back and I do a lot of research in the Broncos history, and I watch the games. In fact, I've been watching all of the 1998 games just to see how many sacks Tom Nalen gave up. I can't find 2 of them, unfortunately, but he only gave up 1 sack that season, which is incredible. So I go back and watch these things, and I analyze them and think about, man, look at the missed opportunities. But those were great seasons, and thank you, Michael, for that. I really appreciate you coming in here in the morning, early in the morning, bringing the support. And yeah, please make sure that you like the show, support the show, keep this thing going. I love doing Mile High, the Legends of Mile High. I love talking about the history, and I love bringing that history to people that may have not been around to see it. So stick with the show, and we'll keep jumping into the history. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming in. Thank you for the support. Follow me on Thomas Hall NFL on Twitter, and follow Scott Kennedy at Scout Kennedy on Twitter as well. So appreciate the support. Thank you so much for being here, and have a great day, Broncos fans.